It's incredibly common nowadays for video game franchises to have a couple novelizations or sometimes a very expansive collection of books. Halo, Assassin's Creed, Dishonored, Warhammer, tabletop game but still, Minecraft, and even Doom, which has huge themes of Catholicism apparently. And of course, The Elder Scrolls, which despite it being a very vast and rich fantasy universe, only has two official novels, The Infernal City and Lord of Souls, released in 2009 and 2011 respectively. I quickly want to mention that there is a different series of Elder Scrolls novels called Zenetta's Chronicles that I found while researching. These are not canon as far as I know, and it's kind of puzzling how this was legally allowed, but anyway. There are numerous books that appear in the games themselves, some of them even being made in real life. But back when I was first getting into the series, I was quite shocked by the severe lack of Elder Scrolls novels. But after being curious about them for so long, I finally decided to just sit down and read them, and maybe try to figure out why Todd would only have two of them made. Well, first off, despite some of the more negative reviews I saw beforehand, I thought these books were pretty good. They were both written by the same author, Greg Keyes, and are actually a duology of books. It takes place about 40 years after the Oblivion Crisis, aka the main story of Oblivion, where a mysterious floating island called Umbriel has appeared over Black Marsh, and is slowly making its way across Tamriel. Umbriel is essentially powered by souls, so it kills all the people underneath, yoinks their souls, and turns them into an undead army. Enaig, a young Breton girl, and her best friend Mir Glim, an Argonian, accidentally fly up to the island and get stuck there, quickly realizing that it certainly is an infernal city. Umbriel is a strange, dark place, and is kind of just a part of Oblivion flying around in the air. The people who live there are born in an adult body, put to work, which is usually quite dangerous, and typically die in less than 10 years or their souls recycled to make another person, and that cycle just continues on. Enaig sends her mechanical / possibly dwarven bird Ku to warn Prince Atrebus about the dangers of Umbriel, what she had seen it do, and the fact that her and Glim were currently on there. The prince is the son of the current emperor Titus Mede, of course, but his dad basically waves off his son's warnings about the mysterious island, so he decides to take matters into his own hands. A lot of stuff happens with him, and all the characters really, but Atrebus eventually teams up with an old Dunmer named Sul, who desperately wants to take down Umbriel, and together they, with the help of Enaig being a spy basically, learn exactly what it is, where it came from, and how to put an end to it once and for all. So this is a very simplified summary of the books. There's other important characters that appear in the story, and so much that happens in between, like betrayal, political intrigue, romance, although the age gap between Enaig and Atrebus is highly questionable, action, and just the odd yet fascinating location of Umbriel itself. But, you know, I just don't want to give too much away. I've seen some people describe the lore in these books as kind of weird, but in a good way. Like how Morrowind has some weird stuff in it. I mean, riding on giant bugs and huge mushroom trees are a little strange, but it's incredibly unique, and it's why Morrowind is probably the coolest game in the whole series. The lore is easily the best part of these books, especially related to Umbriel. I think the trees being similar to the Hist and that they also communicate with certain people, and even the cooking and alchemy Enaig does while working in the kitchens is so cool, and really shows how funky Elder Scrolls lore can get. But, you know, funky in a good way. It's got the sauce, okay? Speaking of which, the characters are all really great too, and I think most of them have amazing arcs throughout the story. Like Enaig going from a naive, reckless young girl to a hardened, sad young woman. The poor girl had to kill numerous people and experience insane working conditions just to survive on Umbriel. Her bestie, Mir Glim, who is probably my favorite character, never quite felt connected to the Hist like his Argonian relatives, but felt a deep connection with the trees in the Fringed Gyre, and, brief spoiler warning, even chose to stay on Umbriel because of this attachment he felt to them. Atrebus went from a cocky, spoiled prince to a tried and true hero, with Sul being the perfect mentor for him. There's other cool characters I hadn't yet mentioned, like the Inspector Colin, who was originally supposed to search for Atrebus before getting swept away in the mystery of Umbriel, and the insanely brave yet sensitive orc warrior Masgar. Not only is Umbriel and the characters very cool, but these books also connect with the games, mostly Oblivion, and the lore quite well. For example, the characters often talk about Martin's Septum, the Dark Brotherhood shows up, they use the Umbra Sword, the characters interact with some of the Daedric princes like Clavicus Vile and Azura, and so much more. Most of the story takes place in Cyrodiil, as well as Morrowind and Skyrim a bit, so I basically just had mental images of the games for each location. I even even imagine the characters as OG Oblivion NPCs, and here are my recreations of them using the remaster, cause, you know, they look a little prettier this way. And this isn't a situation where some big canonical thing happens and it never gets mentioned. The Umbriel Crisis is actually talked about, at least a little, in Skyrim.
I've also heard that it was a spore that fell from an island floating in the sky, but that just sounds like nonsense.
It would be nice to see this event referenced a little more in the future, though. Even if you haven't read the novels, I feel like it'd still be very cool to learn about a floating island that tried to invade the Imperial City. Plus, even though Skyrim wasn't affected by it very much, it's kind of surprising that there isn't at least a book about it somewhere, but oh well. Alright, ranking time. I'd give the first book, The Infernal City, 3 rats out of 5, and the second a 3.5, but maybe closer to a 4 though. The first one is a little lower for me, mostly due to it ending on a cliffhanger, and I found the second to be the better one since it really ramped up the intensity and concluded the story. Most reviews and critiques I've seen about the books agree that the lore is very fascinating, but a lot of people complain about the writing quality and the characters. I will admit the author's writing was a bit confusing at times and might be the weak point of this series, which is a shame because, you know, they're books, but I do think his writing shines the most with describing locations, especially Umbriel, of course. And he does pretty good with explaining lore concepts as well, like the group of Khajiit Sul and Atropos briefly travel with, or when they were inside of Oblivion. I think it kinda makes up for the maybe decent or lackluster writing otherwise, but that's just my opinion, of course. I'm no writing expert by any means, but I will say I disagree with the character hate. I saw one review in particular that bashed Enaig for being a boring alchemist, which I think is really lame. Not every character needs to be a badass warrior or some insanely powerful wizard, and sometimes, especially in her position on Umbriel, brains matter more than brawn, and her alchemy skills end up really coming in handy later on. I don't think I found any of the characters boring, really. I think they each have pretty distinct personalities and character traits that make them quite unique. Once again, that's just my opinion though, so do with that what you will. Really, the only kinda bad thing I have to say about the books is that it would be extremely confusing to understand as a non-Elder Scrolls fan. Keyes doesn't go too in-depth with things like the major differences between races and provinces, and even some lore elements like the 9 Divines, probably because most people who read this have played the games, so it kind of assumes you just already know these things. Because of this, I wouldn't recommend them to non-fans. But if you are a fan of the series and craving some more content or want to sink your teeth into a good canonical story, then I'd highly recommend checking these out. I listened to the audiobook versions, and despite the narrator mispronouncing some things, like calling Cyrodiil Cyrodiil, he still does a great job overall. Although they're not perfect, and it would be nice to have some genuinely good writing in an Elder Scrolls novel, I still think they're kind of underrated, and I'd love to hear more about them just in general and even in future games, whenever that'll be. I couldn't really find any explanation as to why there weren't any other Elder Scrolls novels made, and honestly, I don't have any theories as to why they stopped after 2, though it probably has something to do with money. I think it's a big missed opportunity on Bethesda's part though. It's such an interesting universe that is so ripe for storytelling, and yet there's only 2 official novels, as well as the actual books in the games, but still. The games themselves are already amazing and have lots of lore and great stories, but I think having books could be the perfect way for people to learn more about the game's universe and even hear stories about completely different characters. I really hope in the future Bethesda makes more novels like this, even if they have nothing to do with the main series. And while we're on the topic, Fallout books would be so cool as well. Todd, get on it, man. So TLDW, if you like to read, love Elder Scrolls lore, and want to know more about what happened between Oblivion and Skyrim, definitely check them out. And if you don't,
I hate books.
then, I don't know, just stay away from Morrowind, I guess.